so some of the implementa- okay. So some of the implementations, fork Kubernetes and make modifications to how the keyring works. And I didn't want to specify any details behind that other than the additional secrets may be injected, right? Or additional creds may be injected and tested beyond the ones that come with a pod.
Yeah.
It's not really relevant to the discussion. It's just right?
Yeah. um, the thing we primarily care about is the API service. Like, you've got these pods, you've got image pull secrets.
Yeah.
That's what we mostly care about. If we structure it in a way that people who do forks and inject credential providers which do know about pods in other ways, like, that's nice. I think Mo has ideas about future things for node level
Okay.
credentials that might make it nice to structure it in a way that
Yeah.
can sort of say, is this credential a credential that I should like re-verify?
This pod, right? Exactly. So there's a set of credentials that this pod has now insured, right?
Yeah. So the right now in tree, the set of credentials we know about are the ones that are coming from secret objects. And so there's sort of two ways to we could say an image was pulled with this, should it be allowed by this other pod? One is the sort of the location, the dimension, the name of the secret where it came from. And the other is the actual hash of all of the credential content itself, right? So the two scenarios we were thinking through, one was you've got a secret object and you've got a token living in that, and you've got some controller that's like renewing that token, every hour or every day or whatever. And so the secret name and namespace is not changing. All the pods in that namespace are not changing, but the token itself is changing. If a pod successfully pulled an image, or if an image was successfully pulled using the token in that secret, it feels weird for the token being rotated to now make the registry be in the critical path again. Like, pods had access to this secret, to the credentials in that secret. If they still have access to the credentials in that secret, it seems reasonable to let them use an image that was pulled using that secret.
Unless expired. Yeah.
We can talk about expiry also. That's a question that I have a hard time actually seeing the case for expiry, but we can talk about that. So one sort of cache key is, where did these credentials come from? And so saying we pulled an image using credentials from the secret named this in this namespace with this user. Therefore, any pod that has access to that secret with that name and namespace and UID should be able to make use of the image. The other is the actual hash of the actual credential content. And that's useful when you have pods in different namespaces using a shared registry credential, right? Sort of the limitation of the system is you have to put it in a secret in each namespace. So if all your namespaces are talking to one registry, you have to duplicate that secret in every namespace. And so there, the actual hash of the actual credential content is going to be the same. And so both of those methods of keying the ensure and allowing if either matches make sense to me. Do those two scenarios sort of seem sensible? Are there holes, that reasons we wouldn't want to allow either of those? Because what's in the implementation now, I think, is just a hash of the credentials, but it means that if credentials get rotated, existing pods or existing images.
Yeah, I guess a question that I have is like, what is the point of having rotating credentials if it doesn't get revalidated when we're being this paranoid about it? Like having this feature on means that we're seriously distrusting workload authors from, being able to access their content. If the secret is being auto rotated, wouldn't we also want to ensure that the new pods that are created also have that? Like if a pod, from my perspective, the point of the rotation is to make sure that it is constantly changing enough that if someone gets access to it, then they don't get to keep access to it. But that is antithetical to what you said, which is they should be able to access it in that case.
The boundary of the credential is when you're talking to the registry. Stuff you already pulled from the registry with a credential before the credential expired, I don't think there's any expectation that when a token expires, like every image you pulled with that expired token is now going to be like deleted and made unavailable. Like that's really strange to me. Going back to like
There is the pull always requirement.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, if you want to force revalidation, you can always say like, nope, always hit the registry. And there's sort of that's a more explicit acknowledgement that registry availability is in the critical path for you. One of the principles that I would want to see is we don't make registry availability critical path except for pods that we haven't ensured had access to a credential that allowed the image.
Yeah, I guess that was something that I guess that baseline thought about it was not the way that I was interpreting the original intent of the KEP, which was basically to optimize the pull always case where some admin wants to ensure that their pods are constantly being revalidated against the registry, but maybe doesn't want to be pulled actually forcing pods that have already done that pulling from redoing it again.
That's right, Peter. It was an optimization of the pull if not present policy, such that you would not require to pull always to validate that one pod, versus another pod. If it's just local, how do you know if that second pod's credits are valid?
And inherent in that sort of restructuring of the admission policy pull always is an assumption that the registry is available, in my opinion. So at a baseline, I think we should figure out whether that this feature is supposed to assume registry availability or not.
Yeah, I don't think most people run pull always. I think most people do not. And are shocked, I tell you, at the current behavior. I'm trying to get us to a point where if you run Kubernetes in its default mode with image pull if not present, which is the default for pods, and you don't run the pull always admission, then we make sure each pod that wants an image has access to credentials that allow that image. And so that's where like the expiration and sort of re-pinging, like I want pull if not present to actually be usable by default. And yeah.
And I think there's there should be two modes, but we don't have enough policies. One, the issue here is tenancy, right? If you have a single tenant, then yes, I would agree that tenant is going to expect on a particular node that that cache is his cache, not any other tenant's cache. When they find out that it's two tenants on the same node, that's when the issue arises, and somebody will actually add the admission controller for pull always, right?
Do you think pull always will still be required in some scenarios for security reasons. For like,
Unless we fix this, yes.
well,
Currently,
yeah.
today, that is the case. Yeah.
Okay. Mo, you've had your hand up for a while. We can make sure you have time.
So two things there. I want to back up just a little bit to Peter's your earlier question about like the rotation piece. So I think we cannot or should not couple the whole rotation aspect with the image being usable, because one, in a lot of environments, you have very strict credential TTLs. So you can't just have a cred that lasts forever. So you're forced to rotate it. And then the other thing is, because the mechanism that's doing the rotation has no linkage with the actual usage of the image, they're completely decoupled. It just has to rotate on some arbitrary TTL, right? But if, for example, if it somehow knew that you didn't need it right now, it wouldn't bother rotating it because it would just be wasting IO, right? So it's basically rotating it because there's no other choice, because at any point in the future, someone could come around and need it. So it needs to be ready then, but it has really nothing to do with running workloads and trying to expire their access. It's just, if I don't do this, the next time someone needs this, they'll get broken, right? So like, I think it's just sort of a limitation of the existing inputs to the API, right? As a, for example, if instead the kubelet at the time of needing it somehow told some magic controller that, hey, okay, now I need a credential, it would say, cool, here's your cred, and the cred would last for whatever, and then otherwise the controller would just sit there idle, right? Because there's no point in sort of wasting that IO. As one piece. The other piece on the whole image pull always, to me, that purely exists because when people realize that the behavior of image pull, if not present, is not what they actually wanted, they use that as a very big hammer for, well, it's guaranteed now to do what I want. But what, like, there isn't a mechanism for them to say, check authentication always, but then use the cache, right? Or something like, or, even like something like that, right? Like check the policy and not the availability of the registry or whatever, right? So there's like a lack of a nuance there, but maybe I don't necessarily think we need a new like mode for image pulling as much as we should try to get closer to people's expectations of the default.
The behavior I'm looking for is if credentials were required to pull an image, then we make sure that a pod has access to those credentials, either the hash of the actual credential content or the secret object where we got the credentials in the first place before it's allowed to use an already pulled image. All the stuff about like expirations and TTLs and like none of that isn't inherent in that. Maybe that would be a useful thing that some people would want, but maybe not. Like it might help combat cache growth or be a way that we could control the cache size, things like that. But I don't think there's anything inherent about TTLs and expiration there. It's this image is on the node. It was pulled with auth. Before a pod can use it, it has to prove it has access to credentials that match the hash or credentials that match the location we got them from. Does that seem like a sensible sort of minimal starting point?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I'm not the one sharing my screen, so when I scroll, it doesn't do anything. That's funny.
Do you in the screen instead?
Oh no! Now you're sharing the wrong tab.
The wrong tab.
Danger.
But don't worry, that's a public calendar.
Okay.
Hey, you're getting paid how much?
We tried to think of the image behaviors that already exist today. So that was the next section. The one that we're focused on is the last, where we pulled with pod service account level credentials. The other three were the ones that categories we could think of. So this is up at the top, existing behavior. Very top. Yep. You guys have certainly been in the weeds on the design and implementation longer than we have. Are those three categories? Are there other other buckets of images on the node that you know about that aren't represented there?
Yeah, that's covering all the cases that I'm thinking about.
Okay. Okay.
When you say never, the wording's a little off. I'm just want to make sure, right? When you say if needed, that's the status of the image, whether it's currently present. And then when you say and never, that's the never pull policy.
No. I'm saying if there's an image that's preloaded on the node, a pod with an image pull policy of if needed or never.
Is it if not present? Is it
sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's what right. Okay, so if not present, yeah. Or never pull. Okay.
Is it never pull? Yeah, sorry, that's what
I think it is never.
Okay. Okay. Hopefully that's clear. Yeah, and the principle is today where you have a pod with if not present or never, anywhere the registry is currently not blocking, we should not make it blocking for images in those first three categories. We should only make it blocking for images the kubelet knows it pulled with auth and needs to re-verify auth. Or not re-verify, but needs to ensure that the pod has access to the correct auth. And if it doesn't, then it's fine for the registry to become blocking in order to make sure that the pod's credentials are valid.
So the first case is one that I think Jordan and I, we've sort of talked about a couple of times. I'm still not fully convinced that we want to continue to treat this as not have the registry availability be blocking for it, because of the case of turning the kubelet on, like turning this feature on in the kubelet if we have it be optional. Like, do you have the expectation that a node admin would like remove all of, or would, in the case where they turn on this feature, they would have to remove all of the images to ensure that those images are not, handled in a like if they want those ones to not be multi-tenant.
Yep.
So that would require more sort of knowledge from the admin.
Yeah, so we kind of talked through a decision tree of what is our ideal scenario. And the ideal scenario in my mind is the feature, we end up defaulting this feature on, and we don't break anyone who's currently working in the way we want. So for pods which happen to be working today because something else on the node pulled an image with a credential, like that's a totally fair thing to break. Like that's the thing we want to break. Pod A pulled with credentials and pod B got to piggyback on the image. Like that's the only thing that is quote unquote working today that we would be happy making not work. Everything else that's working today, we want to keep working. And that includes people who preload images onto their nodes so that they're available and the registry availability isn't blocking.
So you want to treat the loaded manually loaded images as anonymous because we don't
But by default, yes.
by default.
Yeah. I'm totally happy with giving admins ways to say, nope, actually, verify everything. Like admins who are engaged and reading the release notes and care about how their images are treated. Like I'm totally fine with opt-in ways to, let them enumerate the images they care about being available this way, or let them say like, don't auto assume a priori images are anonymous. Like that's great. I'm happy to do that. But for the distracted admins who are just like upgrading Kubernetes every 4 months and aren't reading the release notes, I want to be able to enable this feature, and I don't want to break images they're preloading.
Yeah, I guess that's another sort of philosophical difference between what I was originally imagining and what it sounds like you all have talked about is like the default on case. So, like it was my understanding that this feature would be something an admin would opt into, knowing all of the risks, knowing that registry availability would, be a lot more important, and knowing that there would be, more pings to it. But it sounds like you more want it to be eventually something that's turned on by default and then thus doesn't break existing use cases.
I do want it to be on by default. I think the current behavior surprises everyone who finds out about it. I want registry availability to, again, like in the default configuration, the only time we should ping the registry in a new way because of this feature is when a pod shows up that we haven't proven has credentials. So that's why I don't want the default TTLs to be like, we're going to ping it every hour or ping it every day. Like I don't want to expire stuff sort of proactively. I just want to make sure a pod has credentials, and then basically remember that it had access via those credentials as long as the image lives on the node, if possible. So again, if we want to give admins ways to opt into expiration, opt into more proactive checking, knowing that it puts registry availability in the critical path more, like that's fine. But defaulting the feature on in a way that does the bare minimum of increased pings to the registry, like only when we have to do it to prove a pod needs access is when we should do it.
Without additional policies.
Yeah. So this was the tree. If we default it off and admins have to opt in, like I promise you, most admins who aren't aware of this sort of security issue today won't be aware of it and won't opt in. If I would like to find a way to default it on. If we default it on, then there's sort of two paths we can go. Either the admin explicitly gives us a list of auth-less images, but again, if we default it on, the distracted admins who didn't read the release notes won't know that's a thing they have to do. And so images they were preloading that they thought would always be available will be available until their registry goes down, and then it won't. The other option is to, by default, say images the kubelet didn't pull get treated as allowed, anonymous, authless, whatever. And then optionally give an admin who's paying attention a way to make that behavior stricter if they want to. So that was kind of the tree that gets us to a point where we can default it on without breaking anybody except the people we want to break, whose pods are illegally getting access to images they really shouldn't today. And then give controls for opting into some of the more disruptive things. If admins want to take that, or they value security more than availability, they can opt in to say, nope, here's exactly the images I care about. I think that gets us in a place that's strictly better than today. It's sort of the balance of be more secure for the majority of people and without breaking anybody who's currently working. And yes, there are gaps. If you pull a bunch of images and then you do a minor upgrade and you blow away the kubelet directory where it's doing its bookkeeping, yeah, and you don't delete the images. Like there are certainly scenarios where you can get images on the node that were pulled with auth, and then you can make the kubelet forget about them. That's certainly possible, but I think it's strictly better than today, where like the feature's off, the feature doesn't exist. Yeah, so an admin who's paying attention could adjust their upgrade procedure or adjust their kubelet config, to avoid that. An admin who's not paying attention isn't going to enable the feature anyway if we default it off. And so,
Right.
Got a couple of
Yeah,
hands
that
here.
makes sense.
yeah.
Paco.
I just want to say that at a long time ago, if I remember correctly, there's a scenario that if user want to do because the current secure problem for the if not present, some admins have to turn on the always pull admission controller.
Mhm.
So that's a scenario, and I'm not sure if we can add a new image pull policy, like secure if not present, so something like that, and then those admins can use the new policy.
I don't think
I remember there's a discussion about it before, but
I-
I forgot about the reason we dropped this proposal.
I don't think we need a new API facing option. I think having the kubelet decide what to pull or not based on credentials is a reasonable interpretation if not present. Like right now, if not present, just looks at existence of the image, right? But if we sort of treat presence as the image is here and it's either anonymous or there's a key that says you have access to it. And so the presence gets sort of reinterpreted as the image is here and your credentials give access to it. I don't think we need new API surface at the pod level for this. So if that's the case, any admin using always pull today, that's fine. They'll sort of keep opting into hitting the registry every time, like nothing will break. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo that. Yeah, not for the difference between if not present and pull always. We can I think we can tighten that a little bit and make people happier, because then they don't have to use the admission controller. The one issue that we're not, the bad guy in the back room is never pull. How do we, right? For that one, we probably need additional policy to define what that really means, right? Especially with respect. Do you mean don't pull again? Or do you mean only pods that had, the right creds? Or, what is really meant by never pull? It was never really explained. And I think there's a lot of corner cases for, does never pull mean never pull again? What if it was loaded by some other tool? Should we, right? And in order to do that, I think we need a little bit of a CRY API extension point where we pass the policies down to it so that they can hold and violate, right, the K8s.io cache of images. Right now, you can load it without requiring auth, or you could use auth on a pull, and we don't remember in the cache whether a cred was used or even a hash value, right, for whether that particular hash was used. And that's the place that we should be keeping this cred, because that's where the image is stored, right? And if you had a policy for expiration, again, that would be the kind of thing you should be passing down to the container runtime, in my opinion, so that the cache is cleared when it needed, or at least the manifests are cleared. Just something to think about. I think Mo is up next.
Yeah, Mine was just minor on the previous conversation about having the feature enabled by default. Sort of the way I think about this feature is very much that it is a point in time feature gate and not like an actual knob that you turn on and off, because at some future point the thing will be GA'd and the feature gate will disappear, and the kubelet will now just have a saner default behavior that more likely matches people's expectations. And it will still have some rough edges, like having, that field where you can maybe opt into like a very explicit behavior. I can't see us doing anything different there, because if we made a new field that was required, all that does is annoy everyone on upgrade, because now you upgrade and your kubelets don't start, and I don't think anyone's going to really thank us for that.
Well, you bring up a good point. We're going to, on the emission controller, the default one, for going to pull, pull always, we're going to need to have a switch for if the gate is off.
I don't think, I think we would just, if someone is using that emission plugin, once this feature graduates, I think we would deprecate that. We'd probably leave it in place forever because it's like tiny to maintain, but anyone who's using that, I would just log and say, like, you're using this because of this thing. If you're using this for security reasons, you don't need to anymore.
Okay, like, a warning message or something in the log.
Yeah, like the
deprecation
behavior is better now. If you really want to always pull, like, okay, but
you don't need to
anymore.
Yeah.
So I probably wouldn't couple that. I would just like document it, warn if they're using it.
Warn. I like that. Deprecation warn. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So I think. Okay, can we talk about the expiry, the TTL aspect? If we figure out a way to keep our cache from growing unbounded without auto expiring, so we talked about sort of the dimensions that we need to remember. The secret names, namespaces, the hashes of the credentials. In general, both of those things are like multiple orders of magnitude smaller than the image content itself. So you could remember like thousands of those per image and still be like a tiny fraction of the actual image size. When an image gets garbage collected from a node, obviously that's a good time to forget all the credential information associated with that image, right? We don't care. The next time we need to pull, we'll start our cache up again. That's fine. So if we can control all the data we're retaining, all the bookkeeping data for a particular image, and make sure it's bounded so that it's much, much smaller than the image itself. We were trying to figure out, like, pods per node is already bounded. So that's, order of 100 or 200 or 300. It's a few hundred pods per node. We've got garbage collection running on images, which is bounded by disk pressure. If we can figure out how to keep the cache size bounded, do we need to have TTLs and expiration by default? I'm not sure we do.
I think it's a different policy.
Okay. What's the goal of a?
Yeah, I think what's the point of this policy? Like, what was as an admin, why would I pick 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 3 hours, and what trade-off am I mentally making? And like, what's driving me to set a value here versus never setting one?
Well, I mean, we're doing a bit of a what if here, right? But obviously, privacy, the content could include data, personal data, secret data, information that you don't want to be shared or has an expiration, right?
Yeah, like I guess that is the question. What functionally does the admin get by saying this credential expires if the images on the node or the containers on the node are using the images actively? Like the content, that's one thing. If you're setting an expiration on the content for the container to access, then like I could see that being a case where you'd want to auto, sort of to have a way to force the container to re-authenticate to use it. But once a container started, it's going to have access to the image content forever, as long as it's running.
Like we
So
already have time-based image garbage collection configuration in the kubelet, right? There's max age GC, min age GC types
Right.
of controls. So once an image is unused, I mean, guys, I guess GC is always subject to disk pressure. You can tune it so it kicks in frequently, and like I don't know, you can make unused images
actually
pretty quick. I think
the max age is no longer tied to disk pressure. So you can say if this image has been unused for this amount of time, get rid of it.
So if you're trying to clean up images sort of proactively because maybe there's sensitive content in the images, and you set a lowish max age, then that makes sense to me, right? We pull images when we need them. If they're not used for an hour or a day, we clean them up. That image cleanup will delete all memory of cache and credential cache entries associated with pulling that image. Like that seems like a sort of natural cascade to me. So if you say I don't want images hanging around on the node, clean them up, and also forget what credentials were used to pull them. The next time it gets pulled, we'll sort of start our credential cache for this image again. That makes sense, but I think we already have the controls we need to do that, and we drive it with max age on image GC.
Yeah, I think it's my understanding that the way that it currently works, which it like the credential rotation causing a repull for new images coming in, even if they have the same sort of access to the secret. I think that's a consequence of where in the code the caching is being done. I don't know. Was that an intentional choice on the like from the for Mike or Paco? Was that intentionally done, or was that just like this is where the code is, so this is what like that function knows? It only knows the actual hash of the credential. It doesn't know like the backing secret and whether like it can't correlate the relationship between the hash of the credential and the like the object that the pod is actually getting access to, right?
I just figured it was going to be the hash of the actual credential that was successfully used. I didn't know about the rotation of the sequence.
I don't think we'd considered rotation cases.
I didn't consider it. Right.
Yeah.
I knew as a container runtime, this is the credit that was used successfully to pull. This is the place I should hash it and remember, okay, if I ever need to do it again, and that was going to be one of the credits that were going to be used by hash, then I knew it was going to be successful, or it should be successful again. Okay. And not adding an additional policy to have an expiry date, right?
Well, and also the current implementation, from my understanding, was something that we were thinking about opting into, not defaulting. So now like the paradigm has shifted, and now we have to rethink about like now we don't want to be doing unnecessary pulls, where before we were like accepting the existence of unnecessary pulls because it was something you were opting into.
Yeah. Before it was strictly better than always pull.
Right.
But now if we're doing unnecessary pulls, it's strictly worse than
if not present.
I pulled before and it was here and I still have the token. Why are you
making me do it again?
Yeah, my registry is down and now I didn't start. Thank you.
And it's because we had split it into having two policies. One to fit the first policy being fixed now, if not present, so that you don't have to pull always when you're sharing and checking auths. And the other was adding an expiry time. which is an additional policy, right?
Yeah.
That we didn't have before, right?
Okay. So I have a hard time
I wanted to
seeing when I would use an expiry sort of on top of credential verification. I'd be okay with dropping that out for now and adding it back in if people can like describe when and how they would use it.
The licensing issue, Jordan. Hey, there are licensing. We're getting better at applying licenses, ownership of things, and it's going to come, right? You're going to have a requirement. It's going to come down where you're only licensed to use it for a certain period of time, right? Much like Docker changed the policy on on polls and authorized access, we're going to have issues where people that pulled it before and they're still trying to use it, and somebody comes on and says, well, yeah, but you were only licensed and you stopped paying. You stop paying, you no longer have access to it. It's a different.
Is that so? Again, like we're talking about like a node-wide configuration. It says
Yes.
credentials.
Yes.
We already have a node-wide configuration that says well, okay, so GC only
A
kicks in.
node user, but yeah.
But hold on.
Some stuff on the node is running with this image.
Like, who's
but
the node being controlled by here, though, right? Like, are you self-enforcing a license that if
Right.
you self-enforce,
No, all I'm saying is that is a scenario we need to consider in the future. We don't have to do it now.
I think I actually contest the fact that we need to consider it. For the reason that Mo mentioned, like I don't think self-enforcement is something that like someone who wants to enforce a license and then like expecting that the admins are behaving nicely, us making knobs so that the admins can behave nicely in that case. I don't know if I don't find that particularly compelling, taking myself from the perspective of like someone who is issuing a license. So like, and because of that, like, I think I agree with Jordan that the max 8 of the image is a knob that functionally does this. And a little bit. I mean, it obviously the like
only once nothing on the node is using the image, though. So if you always have some pod using it, then all pods will continue to have access to it.
So Mike, are you expecting basically an image author is saying, I am issuing you a license to use this image, node admin, but you have to set this control on your kubelet? I don't know. I find that to be
I agree with you. I agree with you. The pattern should be a licensed artifact is attached to the particular image.
Yeah.
And then applied by another controller. I'm with you. I agree that should probably be the way to add the policy. Right.
Which and because of that, like I don't think we should design this feature around that sort of like not super like conceptually consistent paradigm.
I agree. So expiry and other reasons, licensing requirements, that sort of thing can be an additional add-on that we talk about later. Doesn't apply to the if not present policy.
Yeah, I like leaning on image GC max age for image cleanup, and some kind of like per image revalidation thing feels like a future sort of layer on this to me. Okay.
Oh, you have a hand?
Yeah, one thing I was going to mention is it's buried in this doc somewhere, but we had mentioned that for the image pull secrets, that when we did a cache key for them, we wanted to include the UID. And the rationale there was that we would not include the contents because the contents might change due to rotation. That's sort of fine as long as the secret name isn't changing. But we wanted to include UID so that you could have the ability to delete the secret. And even if it got recreated, it would no longer match. And that would be a much more explicit action of like, hey, I really mean for you to repull and stuff now, because the thing that you were keying off of is actually gone. Doesn't matter that the name is the same, the UID is different. And I think that is a better mechanism for like revocation instead of like rotation. Right?
Yeah, so the UID is unique per instance. So if the object got deleted and recreated, or the namespace it was in got deleted, some clusters allow self-service. So I create a namespace test, I put an image pull secret name test in it, I pull some images, then I delete my namespace. Someone else then comes along and creates the same namespace name, creates the same image pull secret name, but it'll have a different UID. So that shouldn't let them get access to images that I pulled with my test namespace test secret. So if we include UID in the key, then we get that for free.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay. This is sort of getting into the weeds where I know we're short on time. I don't know. I like where we're ending up. There's a lot of details to figure out still in terms of how we store the information and how we make sure we don't explode the cache and clean it up when the image goes away or clean it up when the pod goes away, stuff like that. So there's structure on disk. So this has to be persisted, obviously, which the current implementation does, but there were some questions about like, how do we make sure we'll always be able to read this information in the future? How do we deal with cases where we can't load the cache, stuff like that? Does keying the data, not keying, but like having the credential data for a particular image, does that seem like the right granularity so that when we garbage collect a particular image, we can just blow away the credential data associated with it?
Yeah, I mean, that's in part of what I was wondering. Also, like, if we're thinking about it more, like at the current implementation, we're thinking about on a very fine-grained scale. We're thinking like that function knows what the secret hash is, and it is verifying it against the cache. If we're thinking it more sort of broadly, thinking about like the secret object in Kubernetes, like, and, you know, using, if we're relying on UID and stuff to maintain consistency. I don't even know if keeping it on the image granularity is the right level. Like, it almost feels like thinking about it on secret granularity could be something to do. So, like, imagine a world where the kubelet always try auth-less, always try the node level credentials. If neither of those work, or if one of those, well, I guess because we'd have to save it on the per image. Never mind. I argued myself out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think I know where you were going, though, Peter. I think you know, recognizing that it's an authentication mechanism with the registry repo, right? That's at stake here, not necessarily any of the images in that particular repo.
Well, I was more thinking like the secret itself is ultimately going to be the thing that we care about. The like, and that is now like the only way that is, besides the auth-less and the node level credential piece, that is like an object that we could potentially use as the key. But
we still have the case where different namespaces are pulling with the same credential, right? And so I think there's for each pull secret, there's two ways that could validate itself against the cache. One is the dimensions, the name namespace UID, right? We previously pulled this image with the credential in this secret name namespace UID, so thumbs up. Or the hash of the actual content, like what's in the current implementation. You know, we previously pulled this image with these exact credential bytes, so thumbs up. We still need the second because pods in different namespaces referencing different secret objects which contain the same credentials. So I think we need both.
And UIDs are reused.
That's a good point. In that case, that would be a different secret. And I almost wonder if that should be treated as a different secret, even if the content is the same.
Yes, a secret with a different UID is treated as a different secret.
Right. So from the perspective of the re-authentication, I think we should re-auth in that case.
I disagree, because going back to the first principle, we want to default this feature on. We don't want to make registry pings be blocking where they previously weren't blocking. And so if pod A used these exact credential bytes to pull an image, and pod B in a different namespace has the exact same credential bytes or hash of credential bytes, then we can verify, like, you pulled with this hash of credentials, pod B in a different namespace has the same hash of credentials, it's fine. You can pull. We don't need to ping the registry. Because we want to default on, we don't want to make the registry blocking in that case.
Okay.
So remembering credential hashes and secret dimensions per image, I think, is a sensible level to do that at. It ties in nicely with image GC. It means we have a one-liner. When you GC an image, you delete the file that had the credential data for that image. Where the kubelet currently does a single pull call, I think it needs to record the fact before it does the pull that I'm attempting to use this credential for this image pull, because if the kubelet crashes halfway through the image pull could succeed in the background, and then the next time the kubelet starts, it'd be like, oh, here's an image. I guess it's anonymous. So it has to be like, I am the one pulling this image. I'm using this credential. I don't know if it's successful or not yet. Then it tries the image pull, and if it succeeds, then it moves the credential data to, like, yes, this is good for this image.
And this is because this is a different UID. It's not the user password, pair that we're,
Yeah, like anytime we're doing a pull, it's a 3-step thing now. It's put a credential name UID hash in a provisional, like, unproven list, then try the pull, then if it succeeds, move it to the approved list.
Okay.
Before we pull an image, I know we're out of time as well, so if we need to drop and pick this up later, we're sort of getting into the details, but we should probably set up something regular to work through the details. Are we storing stuff by digest or by image name? And do we know the digest before we pull the image, if it wasn't part of the pull spec?
No.
Okay, that's what
because of tags.
Yeah. Okay. So if the pod gives us a digest, great, we've got the digest. If the pod doesn't give us the digest, then all we have is the image name. So the bookkeeping we record ahead of time, where we're like, we're going to try to use this image credential to pull this image, it's for the image name, not for the digest. And we don't know what the digest is going to be once.
You've brought up a long-winded problem that we will need to discuss in an updated meeting about the latest tag.
Well, I think we treat latest as always still, but I think that there is something to be said about tags that change underneath the image. So if pod A pulls an image with a tag, it has image digest A, and then pod B, in between that, new image is pushed, image B.
Yeah,
pod B comes in, tries to pull, which is it going to get? That's something we need to figure out.
Change the behavior of the image pull policy. So whatever the kubelet currently does for those things is what we should continue doing. It does make the bookkeeping, the right before the pull and the right after the pull, harder if we don't know the digest before we do.
And Peter's right. The latest is pull always.
Yeah, but the same applies to tags generally. But yes, I think the current behavior is the kubelet does not repull the image, so it uses pod B uses image A in that case.
Yeah.
And yeah, kubelet restart will sort of mess that up a little bit. But
all right. we're out of time. Thank you so much for the conversation. What would be a good next step? Obviously, we have some KEP updates to do. I think we should, to keep momentum, I would like to see the updates and like agreement on the specifics of the behavior and like pinned down in the next couple weeks, so that we can actually hopefully land this for.
We need to pin down where and how we're going to store the, this information, right?
Yep.
Whether it should be in the cache itself with the meta we already have, or a new one, and how, and there's a lot of stuff there. And I think we need to roll out some of these additional caps, right? These additional policies, just so that we don't keep what ifing, right? The expiration, that sort of thing. Just make sure if we already got another cap, okay, we're going to do policies, but they're going to be over there, right? Just roll them out.
Yeah, I mean, getting this in place for normally what we do, we have a future work kind of thing where we put sketches of stuff and we're like, this is an obvious next step, but this is a prereq, so we're going to do this first. Okay. Maybe a first step would be to update the existing KEP with the high level pieces we talked about, not the low level yet, and sort of put TBDs for, we need to define image structure, we need to define how we prevent cache growth. I know Standa was planning to work on this. People who were on the existing implementation in KEP. I don't know how we want to coordinate that. Maybe a pull request from someone. Anyone is fine, and then we can comment and try to fold this into KEP. Get eyes on that.
If you want, I can try to do a summary of what we talked about today, and then try to put it in a KEP update. If that's okay.
Yep. Would it be helpful to set up another sync to try to deep dive into some of the thorny implementation bits, or is that premature?
I'm kind of the opinion the sooner the better. This has been punted so many times. We might as well just let's get it done. I say if we have this coordinated energy around it.
Yes.
To be fair, the cashless one was fixed 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Yeah, all of the back and forth makes me think that this, sort of synchronous conversation will help us sort of get together more efficiently.
Okay. Let's set up another hour next week. Between now and then, let's populate specific questions we want to answer, and we can start doing stuff asynchronously in this doc. And we can get the KEP update going between now and then as well.
Excellent. Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.